My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old, and I just quit the company my parents built. Actually, that's not quite right. I didn't quit. I was standing in my brother Maxwell's corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, watching his face turn red as he pointed his finger at me like I was a disobedient child. "Apologize to her, or you're fired," he said, his voice cold and final. Cassidy stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name. I looked at the woman who'd destroyed everything I'd worked for, who'd turned my own brother against me, and I felt something inside me snap. "Fine," I said, and I turned and walked out. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you're ready for a story about betrayal, revenge, and standing up for the truth, even when it costs you everything, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe because you're not going to believe what happened after I walked out of that office. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Let me take you back so you understand how I ended up in that office, facing down my own brother. Maxwell and I grew up in this company. Our parents, Richard and Catherine Harper, founded Harper Technologies 25 years ago in a tiny office above a dry cleaner. I have memories of being 7 years old, coloring on the floor while Mom and Dad worked 16-hour days building something from nothing. Maxwell is 3 years older than me, and even as kids, we were a team. He'd help me with math homework. I'd help him practice presentations. We were inseparable. When I graduated from MIT with a degree in computer science, there was never any question about where I'd work. When Maxwell finished his MBA at Stanford, same thing. Mom and Dad were so proud of both of us. They used to joke that they'd built the company for us, that someday we'd run it together and make it even better than they ever could. 3 years ago, that dream turned into a nightmare. Mom and Dad were driving home from a business dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light. They died instantly. I remember getting the call at 2 in the morning. Remember Maxwell driving to my apartment. Both of us sitting on my couch until sunrise, not saying anything because there was nothing to say. The grief was crushing, suffocating, but we had the company to think about, employees who depended on us, clients who trusted us. So we did what our parents would have wanted. Maxwell became CEO. I became VP of Product Development. We threw ourselves into work because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. For 2.5 years, we made it work. Maxwell handled the business operations, investor relations, strategic planning. I focused on what I loved, innovation and product development. I created 3 best-selling software products that brought in $20 million in revenue. Our company grew to be worth approximately $50 million. We had 75 employees. We were featured in tech magazines. We were living the dream our parents had started, and despite the grief that never quite went away, I was proud. Maxwell was proud. We were honoring their legacy. Then, 6 months ago, everything started to fall apart. Maxwell met Cassidy at a charity gala. I remember him calling me the next morning, gushing about this incredible woman he'd met, how beautiful she was, how easy she was to talk to, how she really understood him. I was happy for him. God knows he deserved some happiness after everything we'd been through. He'd barely dated since our parents died, throwing himself into work just like I had. So when he told me 3 weeks later that they were dating seriously, I thought it was sweet. When he told me after 2 months that he was in love, I thought it was fast but romantic. When he told me after 3 months that he'd proposed and she'd said yes, I started to worry. But Maxwell was radiating joy for the first time in years, so I pushed down my concerns and told myself I was just being overprotective. Cassidy was beautiful, there was no denying that. Tall, with perfect auburn hair that fell in waves down her back, green eyes that seemed to change color in different light, a smile that could light up a room. She told us she came from an old money family in Boston, that she'd gone to boarding school in Switzerland, that she'd worked in fashion before deciding she wanted something more meaningful. She was charming at dinner parties, always knew the right thing to say, remembered everyone's names, and asked thoughtful questions. On the surface, She was perfect. But I noticed things. Little inconsistencies in her stories about her childhood. The way her Boston accent would disappear sometimes. How Shed changed the subject whenever anyone asked specific questions about her family. I tried to talk to Maxwell about it once. Carefully, gently. He shut me down immediately. "You're just not used to me having someone," he said. "I know you and I have always been close, but Cassidy is going to be my wife. You need to accept that." I backed off. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then Cassidy started coming to the office. At first, it was just to meet Maxwell for lunch. Then she started staying for meetings. Then she started offering suggestions, ideas about how we could modernize the company culture, change our marketing approach, restructure our teams. Maxwell ate it up. He'd look at her with these adoring eyes while she talked about synergy and brand alignment, terms Shed clearly picked up from business podcasts. I watched her befriend our key employees, especially the ones who'd been loyal to me for years. Shed take them out for coffee, ask about their families, compliment their work. She was building a network, though I didn't understand why yet. She also started using the company credit card, which Maxwell had given her. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, spa treatments. When I mentioned it to Maxwell, he got defensive. "She's going to be family," he said. "What's mine is hers." The tension between us grew. For the first time in our lives, Maxwell and I were on opposite sides of something. Everything came to a head with the product launch. I'd spent 2 years developing a new software platform for small businesses, something that would revolutionize how they managed inventory and sales. It was elegant, user-friendly, powerful. We had contracts lined up with major clients worth $10 million. The launch was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I'd been working 20-hour days for weeks, making sure every detail was perfect. This was going to be our biggest success yet. Proof that I could carry on what my parents had started. The Friday before launch, I stayed at the office until midnight, running final tests. Everything was perfect. I went home, slept for 4 hours, and woke up to my phone exploding with messages. The files were gone. Not just the main files, the backups too. Everything I'd worked on for 2 years, deleted. I rushed to the office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely drive. Our IT team was already there, looking devastated. They showed me the logs. The deletion had come from my login credentials, from my computer, at 3 in the morning. But I'd been home asleep. I told them someone must have used my password, that this was sabotage, that we needed to investigate immediately. But the damage was done. Without the files, there was no launch. We had to call our clients and tell them the launch was delayed indefinitely, at least 6 months while we rebuilt everything from scratch. 3 of our biggest clients canceled their contracts immediately. $10 million gone. Our company's reputation took a massive hit. Tech blogs ran stories about our catastrophic failure. Investors started making nervous phone calls. I was devastated. This was my baby, my creation, and someone had destroyed it. But worse than the professional loss was what happened next. Maxwell called an emergency meeting with the executive team. I walked in, expecting support, expecting we'd work together to figure out what happened. Instead, I found myself being interrogated. The IT evidence was clear, they said. The deletion came from my account. Did I have any explanation? I tried to tell them about the possibility of hacking, of someone else accessing my account, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Maxwell sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. "Sloan," he said quietly, "I want to believe you, but the evidence is pretty damning. Is there anything you're not telling us? Any reason you might have wanted to sabotage this launch?" I felt like I'd been slapped. My own brother was asking if I'd deliberately destroyed my own work. I looked around the table and saw Cassidy sitting in the corner, ostensibly taking notes. But when I caught her eye, I saw something flicker there. Satisfaction, maybe. That's when I knew. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew she was behind this somehow. The IT investigation dragged on for 2 weeks. They couldn't find definitive proof that someone else had accessed my account, but they also couldn't prove I'd done it. The whole time, Cassidy was there, being supportive to Maxwell, bringing him coffee, staying late at the office, playing the role of devoted fiancée. But she was also planting seeds. I'd hear her talking to Maxwell in hushed tones. "She's been under so much stress lately," she'd say. "Do you think maybe she's having some kind of breakdown? Or, I'm worried about her. She seems so erratic." Maxwell started looking at me differently. Not like his sister and partner, but like a problem he needed to manage. Then came the staff meeting where we discussed quarterly results, which were, unsurprisingly, terrible because of the failed launch. The whole executive team was there, department heads, senior developers, and Cassidy, even though she wasn't an employee, sitting next to Maxwell like she belonged there. I was midway through my presentation, explaining our recovery plan, when Cassidy interrupted. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "but I think there's something everyone should know. Last week, I saw Sloan having lunch with Gerard Morrison." The room went silent. Gerard Morrison was the CEO of our biggest competitor. Cassidy pulled out her phone and projected a photo onto the screen. There I was, sitting at an outdoor cafe, laughing at something, and across from me was Gerard. The implication was clear. I was consorting with the enemy. My stomach dropped. "That's completely out of context," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Gerard went to MIT with me. We've been friends for 15 years. That was a completely innocent lunch catching up with an old friend." But I could see the doubt spreading across faces around the table. Cassidy pressed on, her voice gentle but deadly. "I'm not making any accusations," she said. "I'm just concerned about the company, about protecting what Richard and Catherine built. I think we all need to be careful about appearances, especially during this difficult time." Maxwell's jaw was tight. The meeting ended shortly after, everyone filing out in uncomfortable silence. I tried to explain to Maxwell afterward, but he cut me off. "Well, talk about this later," he said, and walked away with Cassidy's hand in his. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my mind. The sabotage, Cassidy's perfectly timed revelation, the way Shed positioned herself as the protector of my parents' legacy. This was a pattern. This was deliberate. She was systematically destroying my credibility, my relationship with my brother, my position in the company. But why? What was her endgame? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I was called to Maxwell's office. When I walked in, Cassidy was already there, sitting in one of the leather chairs like she owned the place. Maxwell stood by the window, his back to me. "Sit down, Sloan," he said, not turning around. The tone of his voice made my blood run cold. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Maxwell continued, "about the company, about loyalty, about trust. Cassidy has brought some concerns to my attention." He finally turned to face me, and I barely recognized the cold stranger looking back at me. "At the company party last month, apparently you called Cassidy a gold digger in front of several employees. You humiliated her publicly, questioned her integrity, made her feel unwelcome in what's supposed to be her new family." I stared at him, genuinely confused. "That never happened," I said. "Maxwell, I never said anything like that. I've never even used that term." Cassidy's eyes welled up with tears on cue. "Why are you lying?" she whispered. "I've tried so hard to be kind to you, to be your friend, and you treat me like this." "I'm not lying." I stood up, my heart racing. "Maxwell, this is insane. She's manipulating you. Can't you see that?" Maxwell's face hardened. "What I see is my sister being jealous and cruel to the woman I love. What I see is a pattern of concerning behavior. The sabotaged launch, meeting with competitors, and now this. I've tried to be patient, Sloan. I've tried to give you the benefit of the doubt. But this ends now." He took a breath, and I saw what was coming before he said it. "You need to apologize to Cassidy. Right now. And then you need to apologize to the entire staff for your behavior. If you do that, we can move forward. If you don't, I'll have no choice but to ask for your resignation." The room spun. This couldn't be happening. My own brother, the person I'd shared a life with, who knew me better than anyone, was believing a woman had known for 6 months over me. I looked at Cassidy and saw the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. She was enjoying this. She'd orchestrated this entire moment. I had a choice. I could apologize for something I didn't do, swallow my pride, keep my job, or I could stand up for the truth, even if it cost me everything. No, I said quietly. Maxwell's eyes widened. What did you say? I stood up straighter, looked him right in the eye. I said no. I won't apologize for something I didn't do. I won't grovel to someone who's lying about me, and if you can't see what's happening here, then maybe I don't want to work for you anymore. Then you're fired, Maxwell said, his voice like ice. The words hung in the air between us. 3 years of grief, partnership, building something together, all shattered in that moment. Fine, I said. I turned and walked out of that office, down the hallway where photos of my parents still hung on the walls, past the offices of people I'd worked with for years. I went to my office and started packing up my things. 15 years of my life, photos and awards and notebooks full of ideas, all going into a cardboard box. Some of my colleagues walked by, saw me packing, but no one said anything. They were too afraid for their own jobs. It took me 2 hours to clear out my office. When I walked out of Harper Technologies for the last time, carrying that box, I felt like I was leaving behind more than a job. I was leaving behind my family, my identity, everything I'd built my life around. But I also felt something else. A spark of defiance, of determination. Cassidy thought she'd won. She had no idea what was coming. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes from my office, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. I'd lost my job, my brother, and my life's work all in one day. The grief of losing my parents felt fresh all over again, mixed with this new betrayal that somehow cut even deeper. At least when Mom and Dad died, it wasn't their choice to leave me. Maxwell had chosen Cassidy over me. Had looked me in the eye and chosen to believe her lies. The sun set and I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just sat there in the dark, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. That's when there was a knock at my door. I almost didn't answer it. I wasn't in the mood for well-meaning friends or former colleagues offering sympathy. But the knocking persisted, urgent and insistent. When I finally opened the door, I found Paige standing there, looking nervous and glancing over her shoulder like she thought she was being followed. Paige was our head of IT security, a brilliant woman in her late 30s who'd been with the company for 8 years. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and let her in. She was carrying a laptop, holding it close to her chest like it was precious cargo. "I need to show you something," she said. "But first, you need to know that if anyone finds out I'm here, I'll lose my job. What I'm about to show you, I did on my own time, using my own equipment, but the company would definitely not approve." I gestured for her to sit down, my curiosity overriding my despair. Paige opened her laptop and pulled up a series of files and logs. "I've been running a private investigation since the product launch sabotage," she said. "Something about it didn't sit right with me. You're not the type to make the kind of security mistakes that would allow someone to access your account. So I went deeper into the digital forensics than the official investigation did." She showed me screen after screen of technical data, tracing the deletion back through layers of digital footprints. "The deletion did come from your account credentials," she explained, "but it was accessed remotely, from an external IP address." She pulled up another screen. I traced that IP address. "It originates from a luxury apartment building downtown, the Meridian on 5th Street. My breath caught. "That's where Cassidy lived before she moved in with Maxwell." Paige nodded grimly. "It gets worse. I've been monitoring unusual activity on our servers for the past month. There's a pattern of after-hours downloads of sensitive company information, financial records, patent documents, client lists, proprietary code. The downloads are coming from inside the building, but they're encrypted and routed through proxy servers to hide the destination. They all happen late at night, between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. She pulled up a calendar showing the pattern. Notice anything about the dates? I looked closer. Every download coincided with a night that Cassidy had stayed late at the office with Maxwell. She's been stealing company data, I breathed. But why? What's she planning? Paige shook her head. I don't know yet. But there's more. I did some basic background checking, nothing illegal, just public records searches. Sloan, there's no record of Cassidy attending any boarding school in Switzerland. No record of her family in Boston's social registers. The addresses she's given don't match any property records. It's like her entire background is fabricated. She looked at me seriously. I think you were set up. I think she's been planning this from the beginning. But I can't prove it yet. Not enough to take to Maxwell or the board. I need more time, more evidence. I'm risking my career by even telling you this, but I couldn't just stand by and watch this happen. Your parents were good people. They built this company with integrity. Whatever Cassidy is doing, it's wrong. And someone needs to stop her. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd felt since walking out of Maxwell's office besides numb shock. Thank you, I said. You have no idea what this means to me. Paige reached out and squeezed my hand. We're going to figure this out, she said. But we have to be smart. Cassidy is clearly very good at manipulation and planning. If we move too fast or tip our hand, she'll just cover her tracks better. We need irrefutable proof. I nodded, my mind already racing. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. Someone believed me. And more importantly, we had a starting point for unraveling Cassidy's plans. Over the next 2 days, I threw myself into research. If Cassidy's background was fake, I needed to find out who she really was. I couldn't exactly launch an official investigation, but I could hire someone who could. I found Rita Blackwood through a recommendation from a lawyer friend. Rita was 62 years old, a retired FBI agent who now ran a private investigation firm specializing in fraud and identity cases. Her rates were steep, but I had some savings, and this was worth every penny. When I met with Rita in her downtown office and laid out everything I knew, she listened with the intense focus of someone who'd spent decades untangling complicated cases. This is a classic long con, she said when I finished. Your future sister-in-law, if that's even her real identity, has spent months positioning herself perfectly. The question is, what's the end game? Is she after money, company secrets, or something else entirely? Rita started digging into Cassidy's background, using resources and methods I couldn't access on my own. Meanwhile, Paige continued monitoring server activity, documenting every suspicious download and access. Within 3 days, Rita called me with preliminary findings that made my blood run cold. Her name isn't Cassidy Reynolds, Rita said. It's Cassidy Marsh, originally from a small town in Indiana called Greenfield. No boarding school in Switzerland, no wealthy Boston family. She dropped out of community college after 1 semester and moved to Chicago at age 20. From there, the trail gets interesting. I found records of her living in 4 different cities over the past 10 years. Always using slight variations of her name. In each city, she was connected to a wealthy man. 3 engagements, all broken off suddenly. 2 restraining orders, 1 dropped when she left the state. Can you find any of these men? I asked. Are any of them willing to talk? Rita paused. I already reached out to one, Trevor Hayes, pharmaceutical executive from Boston. He was engaged to her 2 years ago under the name Cassidy Marshall. Hess willing to meet with you. Says he has information you need to hear. I'm sending you his contact information now. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Cassidy wasn't just a gold digger or a con artist operating on impulse. She was a professional, someone who'd done this before, someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and my brother had no idea he was her latest mark. But even as Paige and Rita were uncovering the truth, Cassidy was making her next move. I got a call from my lawyer, someone I'd retained years ago for general business matters. Sloan, he said, his voice tense. I just got a very concerning call from the company's legal department. They're considering filing criminal charges against you for embezzlement. My world tilted. What? That's insane. I never embezzled anything, he sighed. I know. But they've apparently found evidence of large fund transfers from company accounts to an offshore account. The transactions were authorized using your digital signature and access codes. We're talking about $3 million, Sloan. This is serious. Federal crime, serious. I felt sick. This was Cassidy's next move. Framing me for theft wasn't enough. Now she was going to have me arrested, throw me in prison, completely destroy any chance I had of fighting back. It's fake, I said. All of it. She's setting me up. My lawyer was quiet for a moment. I believe you. But belief isn't enough in court. We need evidence. The preliminary documents they've sent me are very convincing. Bank records, email trails, transfer authorizations. If they file charges, you'll be arrested. Given the amount involved, bail could be set very high. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that you might be spending time in jail while we fight this. That night, I met with Paige and Rita at Rita's office. We spread out all the evidence we'd gathered so far. Paige's server logs showing the data theft, Rita's background check revealing Cassidy's real identity and history, the contact information for Trevor Hayes. It was damning, but was it enough to convince Maxwell before Cassidy had me arrested? We need to move faster, I said. She's escalating. She's gone from sabotaging my reputation to framing me for felonies. Who knows what she'll do next? Rita looked at the evidence thoughtfully. The embezzlement frame is sophisticated. She didn't just move money. She created a whole paper trail, making it look like you'd been planning this for months. That takes time, access, and technical skill. She's probably working with an accomplice. The question is, Paige added, what's her ultimate goal? She's putting a lot of effort into destroying you specifically, Sloan. If she just wanted Maxwell's money, she could marry him and divorce him. Why go to all this trouble? I thought about it, about Cassidy's behavior over the past months, about the data she'd been downloading. She wants the company, I said slowly. Not just half of Maxwell's assets in a divorce. She wants Harper Technologies itself. The patents, the client lists, the proprietary software. She's going to steal everything and sell it, Rita nodded. That would make sense. Your company's intellectual property is worth more than its physical assets. If she could get full access to everything, she could sell it to a competitor for tens of millions. But to do that, she'd need Maxwell completely isolated, completely dependent on her, with no one around to question her or protect him. She looked at me seriously, which means she needs you completely out of the picture, discredited, arrested, or worse. The next morning, I met Trevor Hayes at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, somewhere I was unlikely to run into anyone from my old life. Trevor was in his mid-40s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, but when he sat down across from me, I could see the wariness in his eyes, the same look I probably had these days, the look of someone who'd been burned and learned to be careful. Thank you for meeting with me, I said. He nodded, ordered a black coffee, and then looked at me directly. When Rita Blackwood called and told me what was happening to you, I knew I had to talk to you. I should have done more to stop her 2 years ago. Maybe then she wouldn't be doing this to someone else. Trevor told me his story, and it was chillingly familiar. Had met Cassidy at a medical conference, been swept off his feet by her charm and beauty, proposed after 4 months. She'd moved into his home, integrated herself into his life and his business. Trevor ran a pharmaceutical company specializing in innovative drug delivery systems. She was so interested in my work, he said bitterly. Always asking questions, wanting to understand the science, the patents, the research. I thought she was just trying to connect with me, to understand what I was passionate about. I was an idiot. 6 months into their engagement, Trevor's head of security noticed unusual access to their research database. When they investigated, they found that someone had been downloading proprietary formulas and research data, information worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The trail led back to Cassidy. When I confronted her, she didn't even try to deny it at first, Trevor said. She just looked at me with these cold eyes and said, Business is business. Shed already sold some of the formulas to a Chinese pharmaceutical company. When I told her I was calling the police, she ran, literally packed a bag and disappeared that night. I pressed charges, but Shed vanished. Changed her name, moved to a different state. The charges were eventually dropped because we couldn't locate her to serve papers. My company survived, but barely. We had to completely restructure our security, and we lost a competitive edge on several drugs we'd been developing. He looked at me with something like pity. She's a professional con artist, Sloane. This is what she does. She finds successful people, worms her way into their lives, steals everything she can, and moves on. The only difference with you is that she's being more vicious. Usually she just disappears. With you, she's trying to destroy you completely. Why though? I asked. If she's after the company assets, why put so much energy into framing me? Why not just marry Maxwell, get access, and disappear like she did with you? Trevor thought about it. Maybe because you're the biggest threat to her. With me, I was isolated. My parents are dead. I'm an only child. I don't have close family. Maxwell has you. As long as you're around, you could potentially expose her or convince Maxwell to question her. She needs you completely neutralized. Arrested would be perfect because then even if you tried to warn Maxwell, you'd look like a desperate criminal trying to deflect blame. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I brought everything I have. Police reports, evidence from our investigation, contact information for the detective who worked my case. Maybe it'll help you build a case against her. I took the folder with trembling hands. This was real evidence, documentation of Cassidy's past crimes. Combined with what Rita and Paige had found, we were building a genuine case. But would it be enough to convince Maxwell before I ended up in handcuffs? Trevor gave me one more piece of crucial information. There was another victim before me. A real estate developer in Miami named Lawrence Klein. Hes the one who told me about the pattern, about how Shed done the same thing to him. You might want to talk to him too. The more evidence you have of her history, the harder it'll be for her to explain it all away as coincidence. While I was gathering evidence of Cassidy's past, she was ramping up her attacks in the present. 2 days after I met with Trevor, the company's accountant, a woman named Helena Hood, worked with my parents since the beginning, discovered the financial irregularities. Helena was in her 50s, meticulous and honest to a fault. When she saw large transfers from company accounts to offshore accounts, she immediately brought it to Maxwell's attention. This should have been the moment when the truth started to come out. But Cassidy was ready. Before Maxwell could even begin a proper investigation, Cassidy made her move. She presented him with documents showing that I'd set up the offshore accounts months ago, long before I was fired. She had forged emails showing me discussing an exit strategy, planning to steal from the company and disappear. The evidence was sophisticated, detailed, and completely fake. But the most damaging piece was the amount. $3 million. Not enough to completely bankrupt the company, but enough to do serious damage. Enough to constitute major federal fraud. When Maxwell saw the evidence, he had a choice to make. He could investigate thoroughly, give me the benefit of the doubt, or he could believe what Cassidy was showing him. He chose to believe Cassidy. The company lawyers recommended pressing criminal charges immediately. They said the evidence was clear, that if they didn't prosecute, they'd look complicit. Maxwell hesitated. For all the damage between us, I was still his sister. Some part of him didn't want to believe I'd steal from our parents' company. But Cassidy was there, whispering in his ear, playing her role perfectly. She's destroying everything Richard and Catherine built, she told him, her voice dripping with false concern. If you don't stop her now, there won't be a company left to save. This isn't about family anymore, Maxwell. This is about protecting their legacy. I didn't know any of this was happening until the police showed up at my apartment at 6 a.m. The pounding on the door jolted me awake, and when I opened it, I found 2 detectives with a warrant for my arrest. The charges were embezzlement, wire fraud, and corporate theft. I was read my rights, handcuffed in my own living room, and taken to the police station in the back of a squad car. The booking process was humiliating and surreal. Fingerprints, photographs, a strip search, and then a cell. A actual jail cell with bars and a metal toilet and a thin mattress that smelled like disinfectant and despair. My bail hearing wasn't until the following Monday. This was Friday morning. I was going to spend 3 days in jail. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I shared a cell with 5 other women, some in for drug charges, others for assault or theft. Most of them were surprisingly kind when they learned my story. Street-smart women who recognized a setup when they heard one. But kindness didn't change the fact that I was locked in a cage, that I couldn't leave, that I had to eat terrible food and sleep with the lights always on and listen to the sounds of people crying or shouting or just existing in their own personal hells. I had a lot of time to think about my parents and how disappointed they'd be to see what had happened to their company and their children. About Maxwell and how completely Cassidy had manipulated him. About my own choices and whether I should have just apologized like he demanded, whether standing on principle was worth this nightmare. On Monday morning, I was taken to court for my bail hearing. The prosecutor argued that I was a flight risk, given the amount of money allegedly stolen and my lack of current employment. They requested bail be set at $500,000. My public defender, an exhausted-looking woman in her 30s who was juggling about 20 cases, argued that I had no criminal record and strong community ties. The judge set bail at $500,000 anyway. I didn't have that kind of money. My savings had been depleted by legal fees and hiring Rita. My assets were frozen pending the investigation. I was going back to jail, possibly for months until the trial. I felt despair washing over me, drowning me. This was it. Cassidy had won. Shed destroyed my reputation, turned my brother against me, and now I was going to prison for crimes I didn't commit. But then, as the bailiff was moving to take me back to holding, a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. "Your Honor, I'd like to post bail for the defendant." I turned around and saw Rita Blackwood standing up, looking fierce and determined. The judge looked surprised. "And you are?" Rita stepped forward. Rita Blackwood, private investigator, and friend of Miss Harper. I'll post the full bail amount. Within an hour, I was free, walking out of the courthouse into the sunlight with Rita beside me. "Why did you do that?" I asked her. "That's $500,000. If I run, you lose everything." Rita looked at me with steely eyes. "You're not going to run. And more importantly, you're innocent. I've spent 30 years investigating fraud, and I know a setup when I see one. We're going to prove your innocence and take down the woman who did this to you. But I can't do that if you're locked up in jail." The weeks following my release were a blur of legal proceedings, investigations, and mounting evidence. Rita was working around the clock, following up on Trevor Hayes' information, tracking down the other victims of Cassidy's cons, building a timeline of her criminal history. Paige was still secretly monitoring company servers, documenting every suspicious download and transfer. And I was trying to survive, living in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town because I could barely afford rent, eating ramen noodles and gas station sandwiches, watching my life fall apart on the evening news. The story had been picked up by local media. Tech heiress accused of embezzling from family company. The articles made me sound entitled and greedy, someone who'd betrayed her parents' legacy for money. The comments sections were brutal. Strangers speculated about my character, my motives, my guilt. Some people defended me, but they were drowned out by those convinced I was guilty. I couldn't find work. Even jobs I was overqualified for wouldn't hire me once they saw my name attached to pending felony charges. My professional network, built over 15 years, evaporated overnight. Former colleagues didn't return my calls. Friends made excuses why they couldn't meet up. I was radioactive, toxic, someone to avoid. The isolation was crushing. I'd gone from VP of a successful tech company to unemployed criminal defendant living in a motel in less than 2 months. My mental health was deteriorating. I wasn't sleeping well, was barely eating, spent hours staring at the ceiling, wondering how this had happened. One particularly dark night, I found myself looking at a bottle of sleeping pills I'd been prescribed for the insomnia. Counting them, thinking about how easy it would be to just take them all and make everything stop. That's when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Miss Harper," a woman's voice said. "My name is Judith Winters. I don't know if you remember me, but I was your parents' original business partner when they founded Harper Technologies." I sat up, memories flooding back. Judith had been there at the beginning, had helped my parents get their first investors, had served as their CFO for the first 10 years of the company. Shed left about 10 years ago to retire, and I hadn't thought about her in years. I saw the news coverage, Judith continued, her voice warm but firm. "And I want you to know that I don't believe a word of it. I knew your parents, Sloan. I knew them well. And I know they raised you to be honest and hardworking. Whatever's happening here, I know you didn't steal from that company." Judith's call was a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. She offered to testify as a character witness if the case went to trial, to vouch for my integrity and work ethic. But more than that, she offered something I desperately needed: belief. Someone who knew me, who knew my family, who believed in my innocence. We talked for over an hour, and by the end of the conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Not just hope for acquittal, but hope that maybe I could survive this, that maybe there was a path forward even through this nightmare. Judith also mentioned that she had old company documents stored in her garage, records from the early days of Harper Technologies. "I'm not sure if they'll be useful," she said, "but you're welcome to go through them." Sometimes the past can shed light on the present, but even as Judith was offering support, another betrayal was unfolding. My best friend from college, Meredith Cross, was someone I'd known for 15 years. We'd been roommates junior and senior year, had stayed close after graduation, talked at least once a week. Meredith worked as a marketing consultant and had occasionally done projects for Harper Technologies. When I'd been arrested, I'd called her from jail, desperate and scared. Shed visited me, brought me magazines and snacks, told me everything would be okay. Shed seemed like one of the few people still in my corner. I trusted her completely. That trust was about to be weaponized against me. Unknown to me, Meredith had been recording our conversations. During her jail visit, Shed asked me questions that seemed supportive, but were actually designed to be incriminating when taken out of context. "Did you take the money?" Shed asked. "I mean, I would understand if you did. You've been through so much. Were you planning to leave the company anyway?" It answered honestly, emotionally, never imagining that my words were being recorded. "I didn't take any money," it said. "But God, there were days I wanted to leave. Days when dealing with Maxwell and Cassidy made me want to walk away from everything." Meredith edited those recordings, cutting out context, rearranging words, making it sound like I was confessing to planning to steal from the company. She gave the edited recording to Cassidy, who promptly gave it to the prosecutors building the case against me. I discovered the betrayal during a pre-trial hearing when the prosecutor played the recording for the judge, arguing it was evidence of my intent to defraud the company. I sat there in shock, listening to my own voice, my own words twisted and manipulated to sound like a confession. I recognized the questions, remembered that jail visit, and felt something break inside me. Meredith had sold me out. My best friend, someone I'd trusted with my secrets and fears, had betrayed me for money. I later learned through Rita's investigation that Cassidy had been paying Meredith as a marketing consultant for the past 3 months, to the tune of $20,000. $20,000 was apparently the price of 15 years of friendship. After the hearing, my lawyer pulled me aside. "This is bad," he said bluntly. "That recording, even though it's edited and taken out of context, is powerful evidence for the prosecution. Combined with the financial documents, it paints a picture of someone who is planning to steal from the company. We can argue that it's edited, that it's out of context, but the jury is going to hear your voice, seemingly admitting to wanting to leave with company money. We need to seriously consider a plea deal." I felt like I was drowning. "A plea deal? I didn't do anything wrong," he sighed. "I know. But the evidence against you is substantial and sophisticated. If we go to trial and lose, you're looking at 20 years in federal prison. If we take a plea, maybe we can get it down to 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. That night in my motel room was the darkest of my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at those sleeping pills again, seriously considering whether I wanted to keep fighting or just end it all. I'd lost my company, my brother, my reputation, my friends, my freedom. I was facing decades in prison for crimes I didn't commit. Even people I'd trusted had turned against me. What was the point of continuing? I held the bottle in my hands, reading the warning label, doing the math on how many it would take. My phone was on the nightstand, and I found myself staring at it, thinking about who I would call if I was going to say goodbye. The list was painfully short. Rita, who believed in me but barely knew me. Paige, who was risking her career to help me. Judith, who'd known my parents. That was it. That was all I had left. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe it was thinking about my parents and how disappointed they'd be if I gave up. Maybe it was sheer stubborn anger at Cassidy for putting me in this position. Maybe it was just the raw human instinct to survive. But I put the pills down and instead picked up my phone and called Rita. "I need to know we have a real chance here," I said when she answered. "I need to know that fighting this isn't just prolonging the inevitable." Rita was quiet for a moment. "I won't lie to you, Sloane. The case against you is strong because Cassidy is good at what she does. But I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen a criminal this meticulous who didn't leave some kind of trail. We're close to finding it, I can feel it. But I need you to hold on a little longer. Can you do that?" I took a shaky breath. "I'll try." Rita's voice softened. "Good. Because tomorrow, I'm meeting with someone who might be able to blow this whole case wide open. One of Cassidy's accomplices from a previous con has agreed to talk to me. If we can get them to testify about her methods, her patterns, it could change everything. Don't give up yet, Sloane. We're not done fighting." After I hung up, I flushed the sleeping pills down the toilet. I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Cassidy wanted to destroy me completely, wanted to break me so thoroughly that I couldn't fight back. But I was still standing, barely, and as long as I was still standing, there was a chance. The next day, I met with Rita, Paige, and Judith at Judith's house in the suburbs. A beautiful old Victorian with a garden and a sense of peace that felt worlds away from my motel room. Rita had news that made my heart race with hope for the first time in weeks. She'd tracked down one of Cassidy's accomplices from her previous cons, a hacker named Brent Colson who'd helped her break into systems and plant false evidence. Brent had agreed to talk, motivated by guilt and the promise of immunity from prosecution for his role in my case. "Brent says he didn't realize the full scope of what Cassidy was planning when he signed on," Rita explained. "He thought they were just going to steal some company data and sell it. He didn't know she was framing you for crimes, didn't know she was trying to destroy your life. When he figured out how far she was willing to go, he started having second thoughts. Then his younger sister, who works at a tech startup, mentioned your name, talked about how much she admired the products you'd developed. Brent realized he was helping to destroy someone who actually contributed something to the industry, and his conscience started eating at him." Brent provided Rita with copies of all his communications with Cassidy, going back 6 months. Detailed emails and text messages showing how they'd planned the product launch sabotage, how they'd accessed my account remotely, how they'd planted the false embezzlement evidence. He admitted to creating the fake email trail and forged documents. He even had recordings of phone calls with Cassidy where she explicitly laid out her plan to frame me and take over the company. The evidence was devastating for Cassidy and exonerating for me. Rita took it all to the prosecutor handling my case. To the prosecutor's credit, when faced with overwhelming evidence that I'd been framed, he didn't try to cover it up or push forward with the charges anyway. He listened to Brent's testimony, reviewed the communications, consulted with the FBI about the pattern of fraud, and made the decision to drop all charges against me. More than that, he opened a federal investigation into Cassidy Marsh for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The FBI got involved because of the interstate nature of her crimes and her history of defrauding multiple victims across state lines. Within days, there was a federal warrant for Cassidy's arrest. But we had a bigger problem. Cassidy was still at the company, still had Maxwell convinced she was the victim, still had access to sensitive data and company funds. If she realized the walls were closing in, she might liquidate everything and disappear, just like she had with Trevor. We needed to move carefully, to make sure she was caught in the act with no way to escape or destroy evidence. Rita coordinated with the FBI and my lawyer to plan a confrontation that would expose Cassidy publicly while simultaneously securing evidence of her crimes. The plan was risky but necessary. We'd call an emergency board meeting, ostensibly to finalize my termination and discuss the embezzlement case. Maxwell would think it was routine legal business. Cassidy would think she'd won. But when they walked into that conference room, they'd find me sitting there with lawyers, investigators, and federal agents ready to present the truth. While Rita was building the legal case, Paige made a breakthrough on the technical side. She'd been monitoring Cassidy's digital activity and discovered the full scope of her plan. Cassidy had been systematically downloading every valuable piece of intellectual property Harper Technologies owned, all of our proprietary code, patent documents, client lists, and financial records. Paige traced the destination of those downloads to a series of encrypted offshore servers. With help from Brent, who knew Cassidy's methods, Paige was able to decrypt some of the data and discovered that Cassidy had a buyer lined up, a shell corporation linked to a Chinese tech company willing to pay $30 million for our trade secrets. The sale was scheduled to go through 2 weeks after Cassidy's wedding to Maxwell. "She's been planning this for at least a year," Paige said, showing us the timeline she'd constructed. "She researched your family, learned about the company, identified Maxwell as vulnerable after your parents' death, and executed a nearly perfect con. If it weren't for a few small digital mistakes and Brent's conscience, she might have actually gotten away with it." The scope of Cassidy's planning was staggering. She'd created multiple false identities, established offshore accounts, recruited accomplices, and manipulated dozens of people, all to steal from a company built by people who'd never done anything to her. It was business to her, nothing personal, just a massive payday worth destroying lives for. Meanwhile, Cassidy was making her own moves, oblivious to the investigation closing in around her. With me seemingly defeated, charged with crimes and abandoned by everyone, she felt safe accelerating her timeline. She convinced Maxwell to move up the wedding date, claiming she couldn't wait any longer to officially be part of the family. She also launched what I can only describe as a charm offensive at the company. She hosted team-building events, gave generous bonuses to employees using company funds, positioned herself as the caring future Mrs. Harper who was healing the company after my betrayal. She told a sob story about how my actions had hurt her, but how she was choosing to forgive and move forward. Employees who'd once respected me now saw me as the villain, and Cassidy as the gracious victim. She also worked to eliminate anyone who might question her. Helena, the accountant who'd first noticed the financial irregularities, was forced into early retirement after Cassidy claimed Helena had questioned her integrity and created a hostile work environment. Other longtime employees who'd been loyal to me suddenly found themselves pushed out or demoted. Cassidy was systematically removing anyone who might challenge her, while promoting people who owed their positions to her generosity. She was creating a cult of loyalty around herself and Maxwell, isolating him further, making sure he had no one to turn to but her. It was psychological manipulation at its finest and most terrifying. But there was one development we hadn't anticipated. Maxwell started having doubts. It began small. He found an old photo album while cleaning out a closet. Pictures of him and me as children. Photos from family vacations and holidays. Our parents had written notes on the back of some photos. "So proud of our brilliant daughter." My mother had written on a photo of me at my college graduation. "Maxwell and Sloan, best team in the world." My father had written on a photo of us at the company's 10th anniversary party. Looking at those photos, reading those words, Maxwell couldn't reconcile the sister our parents had loved and been proud of with the criminal Cassidy claimed I was. He started paying closer attention to Cassidy's behavior, noticing little inconsistencies. She'd tell him she was having lunch with her mother in Boston, but when he called her during lunch, she was clearly in a restaurant in the city, not on a cross-country call. She'd claimed to be at the gym, but he'd smell cigarette smoke on her clothes, and the gym was non-smoking. Small lies, easily explained away individually, but they accumulated. One night, he woke up at 2 a.m. and found her on her phone in the bathroom, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When he asked who she was talking to, she claimed it was the wedding planner dealing with a crisis. But the wedding planner's office wasn't open at 2 a.m. Maxwell's doubts were growing, but he was still in denial. Still wanted to believe in the woman he'd fallen in love with. He was experiencing cognitive dissonance, the painful mental state of holding two contradictory beliefs. Part of him knew something was wrong with Cassidy's story. Part of him desperately wanted to believe she was who she claimed to be. That internal conflict was eating at him, making him irritable and stressed. Cassidy noticed the change in his behavior and worked harder to reassure him, to love-bomb him, to isolate him from any influence that might make him question her. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing. With all our evidence gathered and the FBI coordinating with us, we prepared for the final confrontation. Rita worked with the company's board of directors, explaining the situation and the evidence we'd collected. The board members were shocked and angry. They'd been fooled just like Maxwell, had believed Cassidy's lies, had voted to fire me and press charges. Now they understood they'd been manipulated by a professional con artist. They agreed to call an emergency board meeting under the pretense of finalizing legal matters related to my termination. Maxwell and Cassidy would have no reason to suspect anything was wrong. To make Cassidy feel completely safe, we planted false information suggesting Id fled the country. Rita arranged for fake travel records showing Id purchased a one-way ticket to Brazil, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. She leaked this information to a journalist who'd been covering my case, and within hours, there was a news story. Disgraced tech executive flees prosecution, whereabouts unknown. Cassidy saw the story and believed Id given up, that Id run rather than face trial. It was exactly what Shed wanted. With me gone, there was no one left to challenge her or warn Maxwell. She could execute the final phase of her plan without interference. Emboldened by my apparent flight, Cassidy accelerated her timeline dramatically. She moved the wedding up by 2 weeks, telling Maxwell she didn't want to wait any longer. She also began the final phase of asset transfer, moving larger amounts of money more aggressively, liquidating company investments, preparing everything for the big payout. Paige monitored it all, documenting every transfer, every download, every crime Cassidy committed. The FBI had more than enough evidence to arrest Cassidy immediately, but we convinced them to wait until the board meeting. We wanted Maxwell to see the truth with his own eyes, to hear Cassidy's crimes laid out in front of him. He needed to understand what had happened, needed closure, needed to know that his sister hadn't betrayed him but had been the victim all along. The night before the board meeting, Maxwell couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that photo album, about the sister he'd grown up with, about the 28 years of memories they shared. He thought about how I'd been there for him when their parents died, how we'd cried together, grieved together, rebuilt together. He thought about the products I'd created, the dedication I'd shown, the hours I'd worked. Could someone who'd given so much to the company really steal from it? The evidence said yes, but his heart said no. He was torn, confused, grieving the loss of his sister regardless of whether I was guilty or innocent. Cassidy, meanwhile, was on her phone late into the night, coordinating with her buyer, making final arrangements for the data transfer and payment. She was planning to execute the sale the day after the board meeting, as soon as all the legal formalities of my termination were complete. Then she'd have the wedding, drain Maxwell's personal accounts during the honeymoon, and file for divorce within 6 months, claiming irreconcilable differences and demanding half of everything in the settlement. By the time Maxwell realized what had happened, she'd be in a non-extradition country with tens of millions of dollars, and he'd be left with a bankrupted company and a broken heart. It was a perfect plan, elegant in its cruelty. And it would have worked if not for Brent's conscience and the determination of a few people who believed in the truth. The morning of the board meeting, I woke up in my motel room feeling a strange sense of calm. This was it. Today, the truth would come out. Today, Cassidy would be exposed. Today, it'd either get my life back or watch it crumble completely. There was no middle ground. I dressed carefully in the one good suit I still owned, did my hair and makeup, tried to look like the confident executive I used to be, rather than the broken woman I'd become. Rita picked me up at 9 in the morning. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "Let's end this." We arrived at Harper Technologies at 10 for the 10:30 meeting. I walked through the lobby for the first time in months, past the receptionist who gasped when she saw me, past the photos of my parents on the walls, past the offices where I'd spent so many years of my life. It felt surreal, like walking through a museum of my own past. The boardroom was on the top floor, the same room where Maxwell had fired me. Waiting inside were the board members, Rita and her team of investigators, Paige with her laptop full of evidence, my lawyer, a prosecutor from the federal attorney's office, and 2 FBI agents. We were ready. Maxwell and Cassidy arrived at 10:25. I heard them in the hallway, heard Cassidy's laugh, heard Maxwell's voice talking about lunch plans after the meeting. They had no idea what was waiting for them. When Maxwell opened the conference room door and saw me sitting at the table, his face went pale. He stopped in his tracks. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, looking at the board members. "I thought she fled the country." Cassidy's face had gone from smug to shocked to carefully neutral in the span of about 3 seconds. She was good. I had to give her that. Even caught off guard, she was already calculating, planning her next move. The chairman of the board, a man named Robert Chen who had known my parents for 30 years, stood up. "Please sit down, Maxwell. There's been a significant development in Sloane's case that you need to hear." Maxwell looked like he wanted to bolt, but he slowly walked to his seat, Cassidy following behind him. I watched her eyes darting around the room, taking in the lawyers, the investigators, the FBI agents. She knew something was very wrong, but she couldn't know how much we'd uncovered. The prosecutor stood and introduced himself. "Mr. Harper, I'm here to inform you that all criminal charges against your sister have been dropped. New evidence has come to light proving that she was framed for embezzlement and fraud." Maxwell's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. "What? Framed? By who?" The prosecutor nodded to Rita, who stood and began a presentation, projecting evidence on the screen at the front of the room. "By your fiancée, Mr. Harper, whose real name is not Cassidy Reynolds, but Cassidy Marsh." Photo after photo appeared on the screen. Cassidy's real driver's license, criminal records from 2 states, photos of previous victims, including Trevor Hayes, bank records showing offshore accounts in her real name, communications between Cassidy and Brent detailing how they'd hacked my account, sabotaged the product launch, planted the embezzlement evidence. It was devastating, irrefutable, overwhelming. Maxwell sat frozen as Rita walked through the evidence, piece by piece, building a timeline of Cassidy's con from the moment Shed targeted our family. With each new revelation, I watched the color drain from his face. He looked at Cassidy several times, silently begging her to deny it, to explain it away, but she sat perfectly still, her mask finally slipping. When Rita showed the emails between Cassidy and the Chinese tech company, detailing the $30 million sale of our intellectual property, Maxwell made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. "None of this is real," Cassidy finally said, her voice shaking but defiant. "This is fabricated. Sloane probably created all of this to frame me, to get back at me for telling the truth about her crimes." But Rita was ready for that. She pulled up the phone recordings Brent had made, played them for the room. Cassidy's voice filled the conference room, cold and calculating as she detailed her plans. "Maxwell is pathetically easy to manipulate," her recorded voice said. "Lonely rich boys are always the easiest marks. Has so desperate for affection he'll believe anything I tell him. Once we're married, he'll have access to everything, and then we drain it all." Maxwell stood abruptly, his chair clattering backward. That's not real, he said desperately. That's not her voice. That's an AI fake or something. But Cassidy was already moving toward the door, trying to leave before things got worse. One of the FBI agents stepped in front of the exit, blocking her path. Miss Marsh, please sit down, he said calmly. Cassidy spun around, her carefully constructed persona finally shattering. The sweet, loving fiancé disappeared, replaced by something cold and venomous. You people are all idiots, she spat. Especially you, Maxwell. You were so easy. God, the way you fell all over yourself trying to impress me, buying me gifts, giving me access to everything. You never once questioned me, never once did your due diligence. You just handed me the keys to your entire life because I batted my eyelashes and pretended to care about your boring tech company. Maxwell looked like Shed physically struck him. You never loved me, he whispered. Cassidy laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Love you? I've been counting down the days until I could take the money and never see your face again. This whole thing, the sweet girlfriend act, the supportive partner routine, it was all fake. All of it. And you fell for every second. She was unraveling now, months of careful deception collapsing as she realized she'd been caught. You know what the best part was, she continued, her voice rising. Watching Sloane's face when you chose me over her. Watching you destroy your relationship with your own sister because I told you to. That was almost worth more than the money. Almost. She turned to me, her eyes filled with malice. You were the hard part, she admitted. You were too smart, too observant. You never really trusted me, did you? I could see it in your eyes. That's why I had to destroy you completely. Couldn't just discredit you. Had to make you a criminal. Had to make sure everyone turned against you. And it worked. God, it was so satisfying watching you fall apart. The FBI agent moved toward her. Cassidy Marsh, you're under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. He began reading her rights as another agent pulled out handcuffs. That's when Cassidy played her final card. You think you've won, she said, looking at the board members. I've already transferred $5 million to cryptocurrency accounts this morning. Untraceable, irreversible, gone. Even if you send me to prison, you'll never get that money back. And I have copies of all your proprietary code and patents on encrypted servers. If I go to prison, I'll just sell that data from inside. You can't stop me. She was dragged toward the door, fighting the agents, screaming threats and obscenities. This isn't over. I'll destroy all of you. I have backups of everything. I'll sell your secrets to your competitors. I'll ruin you. Her voice echoed down the hallway as they took her away. Finally, blessedly, removing her from our lives. The conference room fell silent. Everyone sat in shock, processing what had just happened. I looked at Maxwell and saw tears streaming down his face. He looked utterly broken, devastated not just by the betrayal but by the realization of what had done to me, his own sister, at that woman's manipulation. After the FBI agents left with Cassidy, after the board members quietly filed out giving us privacy, after the lawyers and investigators packed up their evidence, it was just Maxwell and me alone in that conference room, the same room where Head fired me, where this nightmare had reached its first crisis point. Maxwell collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, sobbing. I'd never seen him cry like this. Not even when our parents died. These were the sobs of someone whose entire reality had shattered, who'd realized He'd been living a lie, who'd destroyed the most important relationship in his life for a woman who'd never cared about him at all. I'm so sorry, he choked out between sobs. Sloane, I'm so sorry. What have I done? What did I do to you? I sat across from him, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at how easily Head believed Cassidy over me. Sadness at how much damage had been done to our relationship, but also compassion, because I could see how thoroughly Cassidy had manipulated him, how Shed exploited his grief and loneliness, how Shed played him like an instrument. You fired me, I said quietly. You had me arrested. You believed a stranger over your own sister. You chose her over 28 years of us being family. He nodded miserably. I know. I know. There's no excuse for it. I was lonely after Mom and Dad died, and she made me feel less alone. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make me feel special and loved. And when she started planting doubts about you, I wanted to believe her because it meant I wasn't alone anymore, that I had someone who understood me. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I chose poorly. I chose a lie over the truth. I chose someone I barely knew over someone who'd been there my entire life. And I have to live with that. I have to live with knowing I almost destroyed you, that I helped send you to jail, that I believed the worst of you instead of fighting for you. Well, talk, I said finally. But Maxwell, it's going to take time. Trust doesn't come back overnight. You hurt me in ways I'm still processing. But you're still my brother, and despite everything, I don't want to lose you completely. We'll figure this out, slowly, carefully. But we'll figure it out, he nodded, seeming to understand that forgiveness, if it came, would be a long journey, not an instant decision. We sat there in silence for a while, two orphans who'd nearly lost each other, beginning the slow, painful process of finding our way back to each other. The weeks and months following Cassidy's arrest brought a kind of justice I'd stopped believing was possible. The federal case against her was airtight. Between Brent's testimony, the communications Rita had uncovered, Trevor Hayes and 3 other victims who came forward, and the mountains of digital evidence Paige had documented, there was no defense Cassidy could mount. She tried to claim she'd been coerced, that Brent had threatened her, that she was the real victim. But the recordings of her planning and gloating about her cons destroyed that narrative. She was charged with 17 counts of fraud across multiple jurisdictions, facing up to 25 years in federal prison. The judge denied bail, citing her history of fleeing prosecution and the evidence that she'd transferred funds offshore. Meredith, my former best friend who'd recorded and edited my jailhouse conversations, was charged as an accessory after the fact. She lost her marketing consultant license and faced her own legal consequences. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her fall, just a kind of hollow sadness that someone I'd trusted could sell out our friendship so easily. The company managed to recover $2 million of the $5 million Cassidy had stolen through asset seizure. The FBI froze several of her accounts and traced some of the cryptocurrency, but $3 million was gone, likely hidden in accounts and wallets we'd never find. It was an expensive lesson in trusting the wrong person. The civil lawsuits were still pending. The company had filed suit against Cassidy for damages far exceeding what she'd stolen, accounting for lost contracts, destroyed reputation, and the costs of rebuilding after her sabotage. Trevor Hayes and the other victims filed a class action suit. Cassidy would be paying for her crimes financially for the rest of her life, assuming there was anything left to take after her prison sentence. But more satisfying than the legal victories was what happened at Harper Technologies. The board of directors called a special meeting and formally, publicly apologized to me. They offered me the position of co-CEO alongside Maxwell, with equal authority and decision-making power. I took time to consider the offer. Part of me wanted to walk away completely, to start fresh somewhere else where there weren't so many painful memories. But this company was my parents' legacy. It was the life's work they'd poured everything into. And despite everything that had happened, it was still mine too. I accepted, but with conditions. We implemented new oversight procedures, brought in independent board members, created security protocols to prevent anyone from ever gaining the kind of access Cassidy had. Paige was promoted to Chief Information Security Officer, given a generous raise and the authority to build a department that would protect our intellectual property. Helena, the accountant who'd first noticed the irregularities and been forced out, came back as a special consultant to rebuild our financial controls and train the accounting department. We issued a public statement clearing my name, explaining what had happened without going into details that would compromise the ongoing criminal case. Industry publications ran correction stories. Forbes did a profile on me titled "The Executive Who Fought Back: How Sloan Harper Survived a Con Artist's Perfect Frame Job." Former colleagues reached out with apologies, some genuine, some clearly motivated by the fact that I was back in power. I was gracious but more guarded than I'd been before. I'd learned the hard way that not everyone deserves trust, that some people will betray you for the right price. Maxwell and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, painfully, honestly. We started with weekly dinners, just the two of us, talking about everything that had happened. He went to therapy, both individual and family counseling with me, working through his guilt and the manipulation he'd suffered. I went too, dealing with the trauma of arrest, betrayal, and nearly losing everything. Our therapist helped us understand that while Maxwell's actions had hurt me deeply, had also been a victim of an extremely sophisticated con artist who had exploited his grief and loneliness. Forgiveness didn't come easily, but it came gradually, built on consistent actions rather than words. Maxwell gave me complete transparency into all business decisions, deferred to my judgment more readily, and publicly acknowledged his mistakes. He stayed single, focusing on healing and rebuilding trust rather than jumping into another relationship. I cautiously started dating again, meeting people outside the tech industry, keeping my guard up but trying not to let Cassidy's betrayal make me cynical about everyone. We both honored our parents' memory by protecting and growing the legacy they'd built. The company not only survived but thrived. The delayed product ID developed finally launched 6 months later and became our best-selling software, generating $15 million in new revenue. Our stock value recovered and exceeded our previous high. Maxwell's renewed focus and my innovation made us a stronger team than we'd been before. But beyond the professional success, I learned lessons that changed me fundamentally. I learned that trust must be balanced with verification, that blind faith in anyone, even family, can be dangerous. I learned that family bonds, while strong, aren't unbreakable without effort and communication. I learned that grief makes us vulnerable to predators who know how to exploit that vulnerability. I learned the critical importance of having allies willing to risk something for the truth. Rita, Paige, and Judith became genuine friends through this crisis. People I knew I could count on. I learned that some relationships that seem solid are actually transactional, existing only as long as it benefits the other person. Meredith taught me that painful lesson. Most importantly, I learned that standing up for truth sometimes means standing alone, at least temporarily. When Maxwell gave me that ultimatum, when he demanded I apologize or be fired, I had a choice. I could have apologized for something I didn't do, kept my job, avoided arrest, and stayed safe. But I also would have surrendered my integrity, validated Cassidy's lies, and set a precedent that I could be bullied into compliance. Saying no, saying that single word, fine, was the hardest and best decision I've ever made. It cost me everything in the short term, but it saved everything that mattered in the long term. I think about that moment often, standing in Maxwell's office, Cassidy smirking beside him, feeling the weight of that impossible choice. Apologize for lies and keep your life, or tell the truth and lose everything. I chose truth, and it nearly destroyed me. But it also revealed who I really was, what I was made of, what I valued more than comfort or safety. Inner peace doesn't come from others' approval, it comes from knowing you stood firm when it would have been easier to bend. Maxwell learned his own lessons. He learned that grief and loneliness make us susceptible to manipulation, that we need healthy coping mechanisms and genuine support systems, that love bombing and too good to be true should be red flags, not romantic ideals. He learned that communication in any relationship is essential, that assumptions and unquestioning belief can be weaponized against us. Now, standing in my office at Harper Technologies, looking out at the city skyline, I think about the journey from that confrontation to here, from fired employee accused of crimes to co-CEO of a thriving company, from jail cell to justice, from betrayal to rebuilding. It wasn't a straight path, and the scars from this battle will never completely fade, but I'm stronger for having fought it. When my brother warned me, apologize to her, or you're fired, and I said, fine. I had no idea that single moment of defiance would lead to all of this. Arrest, investigation, exposure, vindication, and ultimately, restoration. If I could go back and change that moment, make a different choice, would I? Knowing what I know now about the pain, the fear, the nights in jail, the betrayals still to come? Honestly, no. Because that choice, that refusal to compromise my integrity, even when it cost me everything, defined who I am. It showed me what I'm capable of surviving. It revealed who my real allies are. And it ultimately saved my family's company from being destroyed by a con artist who almost pulled off the perfect crime. Some battles choose you, and when they do, you can either fight or surrender. I chose to fight, and though the cost was higher than I ever imagined, the victory was worth every painful step. So what about you? Have you ever had to choose between standing up for the truth and keeping the peace? Have you ever had to decide whether your integrity was worth losing everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that sometimes refusing to back down is the only way forward, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing strong in the face of betrayal. Share this with someone who needs to hear that fighting for the truth is always worth it, even when it costs everything. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for sticking with me through every twist and turn. I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things get, no matter how thoroughly someone tries to destroy you, the truth has a way of emerging if you're brave enough to keep fighting for it. Stay strong, trust carefully, and never let anyone convince you to apologize for standing in your truth. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.